The highway stretched endlessly into night, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through an ocean of darkness. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white from exhaustion. The only sounds were the low hum of the truck's engine and the occasional rustling of wind against the windows. His eyelids felt heavy, but he forced himself to stay alert. There was no time for rest. He was behind schedule, and the next truck stop was still miles away. He glanced at the fuel gauge. Almost empty. Damn. He had miscalculated the last stop, and now he was running on fumes. If he didn't find a gas station soon, he'd be stranded in the middle of nowhere. His phone sat uselessly on the passenger seat. No signal. Not that it mattered. This was the kind of road where you could drive for hours without seeing another soul. Then, in the dim glow of his high beams, he saw her. A lone figure stood by the roadside, barely visible against the darkness. A woman, dressed in a long, tattered dress that looked like it belonged to another time. Her hair was long and tangled, obscuring most of her face. She stood motionless, her head tilted slightly downward, as if she'd been standing there for hours, maybe longer. Daniel's stomach tightened. What the hell was she doing out here? He drove past her at first, the image of her fading into the rearview mirror. But something gnawed at him. A woman alone in the middle of nowhere. It didn't feel right. His foot hesitated over the brake pedal. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to keep going. Don't stop. Don't get involved. But then, almost on instinct, he found himself pulling over. The truck hissed as it came to a stop. He glanced into the mirror again. She hadn't moved, still standing there, still waiting. Daniel rolled down the window. The night air was unnaturally cold. You need a ride? His voice came out rough, uncertain. For a long moment, she didn't react. Then, without a word, she moved. Her steps were slow, deliberate. The gravel crunched softly beneath her bare feet as she approached the passenger door. She reached for the handle, fingers pale and thin. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He realized then that he hadn't actually seen her face. Her hair still hung in front of it, obscuring her features in the dim light. The door creaked open, and she slid into the seat beside him. The truck suddenly felt smaller. The space between them too close. The air too thick. She didn't buckle her seatbelt. She didn't look at him. She simply sat there, facing forward, hands folded neatly in her lap. Daniel cleared his throat. Where you headed? She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly raised one hand and pointed straight ahead into the darkness. The silence between them stretched thin, heavy like a fog settling over the truck's cab. Daniel waited, expecting some kind of response. But the woman remained eerily still. Not a single movement, not even a rise and fall of her breath. His fingers tapped restlessly against the steering wheel as he glanced at her from the corner of his eye. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her posture unnaturally rigid. The dress she wore looked old, weathered, like something pulled from another era. The fabric was slightly damp, clinging to her thin frame. A chill crept up his spine. Trying to shake the discomfort, he cleared his throat. You okay? No answer. The truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the endless stretch of road ahead. The fuel gauge was still dangerously low, and he made a mental note to find a station soon. The woman sat motionless, her head tilted slightly downward. Her face remained hidden. Daniel exhaled sharply, forcing a chuckle. Not much of a talker, huh? His voice sounded forced, unnatural in the stifling quiet. Still, no reaction. He shifted uncomfortably. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe she had been through something awful and couldn't talk about it. That would explain why she was out there, alone in the middle of nowhere. But that didn't explain the cold. Even with the heater running, the air inside the truck felt off, too still, too heavy. A glance at the dashboard clock. 1:47 a.m. The radio crackled softly in the background, nothing but static between stations. He reached over and twisted the dial, trying to find something, anything, to break the silence. The static deepened, warped. Then, through the distortion, a faint whisper emerged. Don't stop! Daniel's blood ran cold. His hand froze on the dial. He turned it back, scanning for the voice again. Nothing, just a hollow hum of static, swallowing the sound like it had never existed. He swallowed hard. He had to be imagining things. Exhaustion was playing tricks on him. The woman sat beside him, still as a statue. His pulse hammered in his ears. His throat felt dry. He forced himself to focus on the road, telling himself he'd drop her off at the next available stop, wherever that was. But when he glanced at the GPS screen, his stomach dropped. The map had rerouted to an unknown destination. A single road, stretching infinitely forward, with no turns, no intersections. Just the words, "Continue driving." Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. The GPS screen flickered, the glowing, "Continue driving" message pulsing like a heartbeat. He tapped the screen, hoping it was just a glitch. Nothing changed. No route, no estimated arrival time. Just an endless stretch of road ahead. The woman beside him remained utterly still. His throat felt dry. The silence had grown unbearable, thick with something unspoken. He had never been the type to spook easily. Long nights on the road had made sure of that. But something about this felt wrong. The radio crackled again. The static warped, twisting in a way that made his skin prickle. Then he heard it. A whisper. Soft, distant. Words lost in the distortion. "Don't stop." Daniel's breath hitched. He flicked off the radio, his pulse hammering in his ears. His thoughts raced, logic scrambling for a foothold. It was just the static. That's all. But the chill in the air suggested otherwise. He risked another glance at the woman. She hadn't moved an inch. She just sat there, head slightly tilted forward. Hair draped over her face. His skin crawled. "Hey," he muttered, trying to mask the unease in his voice. "Are you hearing this?" No answer. He licked his lips, forcing out a breath. All right. She was probably traumatized. That had to be it. Something terrible had happened to her, and she was in shock. That was the most logical explanation. And yet, that tiny primal part of his brain refused to accept it. The headlights illuminated the road ahead. Still the same stretch of asphalt, no landmarks, no signs, no gas stations. It felt like he had been driving forever, but the odometer barely ticked forward. His fingers flexed against the wheel. He needed a distraction. He glanced into the rearview mirror, and his blood turned to ice. For a split second, there was something in the back seat, a third figure, just a shadow, a shape barely visible in the darkness. No clear features, no movement, just there. His stomach lurched. He snapped his eyes forward, his breath coming fast. When he looked back, nothing. The back seat was empty, but the feeling remained, a suffocating, invisible weight pressing against his chest. Daniel's hands were trembling now. The truck suddenly felt too small, too full. The woman beside him still hadn't moved. He swallowed hard. Keep driving. Just keep driving. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure where the road was leading. Daniel's fingers clenched around the steering wheel, his knuckles stark white against the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His pulse thundered in his ears. He forced himself to keep his eyes on the road, refusing to look in the rearview mirror again. He knew what he saw, or rather what he thought he saw. He exhaled sharply, trying to shake off the suffocating unease creeping up his spine. The exhaustion was getting to him. That had to be it. Maybe he'd been driving too long. Maybe his mind was slipping. But then why did it feel so real? He glanced at the odometer. It hadn't moved. His stomach twisted. That didn't make sense. He had been driving for nearly 2 hours, but the numbers on the dashboard remained frozen. His gaze flicked to the fuel gauge, unchanged. That cold feeling in his gut deepened. He knew trucks. He had spent years on the road. This was impossible. A whisper of breath left his lips. What the hell is going on? The woman beside him didn't react. Daniel's jaw tensed. His foot hovered over the brake pedal. But something in the back of his mind, something instinctual, told him not to stop. His throat tightened. He turned to her, voice rough with unease. "Where do you need to go?" For the first time since she entered the truck, she moved. Slowly, her head tilted, just slightly, and then in a motion that made Daniel's blood freeze. She turned toward him. His breath stalled in his chest. The hair that had obscured her face shifted, and for a fraction of a second, he thought he saw. No, his stomach clenched. His hands felt slick with sweat against the wheel. He couldn't explain why, but something deep inside him whispered that he should not look directly at her. His jaw tightened. He snapped his eyes back to the road. Focus. Just drive. His breath came shallow, unsteady. The silence inside the truck grew heavier, pressing against his skull like a vice. Something was wrong. More wrong than he could comprehend. The GPS screen flickered again. A new message appeared, burning into the screen like an order. Don't turn around. Daniel's chest constricted. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs. And beside him, the woman sat perfectly still. Daniel's breath felt trapped in his throat. His hands, slick with sweat, clenched the wheel tighter. Don't turn around. The words on the GPS screen pulsed in a rhythmic glow, as if warning him or begging him. He swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every nerve in his body screamed that something was horribly, impossibly wrong. Beside him, she hadn't moved. Not really, but something felt different now. The silence between them had changed, warped into something deeper, heavier. The air inside the truck felt too thick, too cold, like all warmth had been drained from the space. Daniel's throat was dry. He forced his voice to work. Who are you? No answer. His fingers flexed against the wheel. What do you want? For the first time, she shifted, slowly, deliberately. Daniel held his breath as she lifted her head, just enough for him to catch a glimpse beneath the curtain of tangled hair. A single eye stared back at him. Dark, hollow, wrong. A pit formed in his stomach. It wasn't just empty. It was endless, a void where something human should have been. His instincts screamed at him to keep his eyes on the road. Don't look. Don't engage. His fingers twitched on the wheel, his pulse thundering in his ears. You're not real, he muttered, almost himself. But then she spoke, a voice that barely sounded like it belonged to something alive. Broken, echoing. You picked me up. Daniel's skin crawled. The words slithered into his ears, distorted and layered, like a chorus of voices speaking in unison. The GPS flickered again. You shouldn't have stopped. A sharp, electric fear surged through Daniel's veins. His breathing turned ragged. He pressed his foot against the gas pedal, as if speed could somehow shake her loose, somehow outrun whatever this was. But the road stretched endlessly forward, unbroken. He forced himself to focus, his eyes locked on the asphalt ahead. Don't turn around. Don't look at her. Don't listen. But then, from the corner of his vision, he saw her mouth curl into a smile, and she whispered, You can't leave now. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. His foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, but it didn't matter. The road stretched endlessly forward, unchanged, featureless. No turns, no exits, no signs. The GPS screen flickered again, the words shifting. There is no way back. His chest tightened. This isn't real. This isn't real. Beside him, the woman remained eerily still, but the weight of her presence was suffocating. His peripheral vision caught the faintest movements, her fingers twitching, her head tilting ever so slightly in his direction. He wanted to scream. Instead, he gritted his teeth and reached for his phone. No signal. Of course. His hands were slick with sweat as he tried again. Nothing. No bars, no Wi-Fi, just a blank screen. The battery percentage flickered between numbers like something was draining it. His breathing quickened. He needed to stop. He needed to get out. But something inside him, a primal, suffocating terror, whispered that stopping was worse. The truck's headlights carved through the darkness, but the road ahead never changed. Then, the first sign of life. A gas station appeared in the distance. A beacon in the void. His heart slammed against his ribs. Finally, he breathed, the neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie, pulsing glow against the pavement. A single pump. A small building with a convenience store. No cars. No people. But it was real. It had to be. He turned sharply into the lot, the tires skidding against the gravel. The truck came to a jarring stop. For the first time since picking her up, he turned to face her, and she was gone. His breath hitched. The seat beside him was empty. The air where she had sat felt heavier, colder, as if something had only just left. Daniel's hands trembled. His mind screamed at him to run inside, to find someone, anyone, but then something scratched against the windshield, soft at first, then harder. His stomach dropped. Daniel slowly looked up. She was standing outside the truck, staring at him. Her face, fully visible now. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. A twisted, hollow void where a face should be. A black abyss, stretching infinitely inward. And then she started to smile. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The woman stood outside the truck. Her empty eyes locked on him. The smile stretched unnaturally wide, pulling the corners of her mouth into a grotesque curve. Her face, no, her features, looked wrong. It was as though the world had twisted her into something unnatural, something not meant to be seen. The void where her eyes should have been seen to devour the light around them, as if they had no end. He couldn't breathe. A knot twisted in his stomach. He slammed his foot on the brake, his body rigid as his gaze remained locked on the horrifying sight in front of him. The truck's engine hummed, but the world outside felt like it was holding its breath. The faint scratching sound continued, more desperate now. Tap, tap, tap. She was scratching the windshield. Daniel's thoughts raced in a frenzy. His brain tried to make sense of the image before him, but it couldn't. Was she real? Was she something else? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he possibly say? What do you want? Felt so small, so pointless in the face of what he was seeing. The scratching stopped, but her face remained fixed on him, unblinking. The silence was deafening. The night outside, once full of endless road, now felt oppressive, like the darkness was closing around him. The smile on her face widened even further, and for the first time, her voice filled the truck again. You shouldn't have come for me, but now that you have... Her voice was barely a whisper, as though it didn't belong to the physical world. It was strange, hollow, as if it echoed from somewhere deep in his mind. Her smile never faltered. Now you'll stay with me. Forever. Daniel recoiled. His hand shook as he reached for the door handle, his fingers cold and stiff. No, he couldn't stay here. Not with her. Not in this nightmare. But when his fingers brushed the handle, the air inside the truck froze. A sensation of complete paralysis washed over him. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The woman tilted her head as if waiting for something, her eyes, those endless, dark pits, staring right through him. His mind screamed at him to do something, to run, but his body refused to obey. He was trapped, paralyzed by fear. The woman stepped closer to the truck, her body moving with unnatural slowness, like a puppet on strings. Her footsteps didn't make a sound on the gravel. The smile stretched further. Then, with a voice colder than the air itself, she whispered, "You will never leave." Daniel felt a sharp, piercing pain in his chest, as though something invisible was pressing into his heart. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he forgot where he was. The world around him spun, and he felt his body begin to sink into the seat, as if the truck itself was slowly vanishing into the darkness. The last thing he saw before everything went black was her face, now mere inches from his window, her eyes pulling him in a deep, suffocating abyss. And then nothing. The darkness swallowed him whole. For what felt like hours, Daniel floated in a state of utter void, unable to move, unable to breathe. His body felt heavy, weighed down by a presence he couldn't comprehend. When his eyes finally opened, the truck was no longer on the road. The neon lights of the gas station were gone. The faint hum of the engine had disappeared, leaving only an eerie silence in its place. He was no longer in control of his body. It felt as though the truck itself was moving on its own, gliding forward, pulling him deeper into the unending night. The road had disappeared, and now all that remained was a vast, empty expanse. The woman was beside him once more. But this time, she was more than passenger. Her presence was suffocating, pulling at him from all directions. Her hollow eyes, her endless smile, her whispering voice that echoed around him, inside his head. Her touch was everywhere, pressing against his skin, inside his mind. "It's over, Daniel." Her voice was calm now, as though speaking to a child who had finally understood his fate. His chest tightened. His heart pounded against his ribs as he forced his hand to move. He reached for the door handle again, but his fingers passed through it, as if it was nothing more than smoke. He slammed his fist against the door, but it was like trying to punch through a thick, invisible barrier. There was no escape. He couldn't escape. The road stretched on endless, with no signs, no exits, just the unforgiving night. The woman leaned closer, her lips brushing against his ear. "You'll never see the sunrise again." Her voice was soothing, almost comforting in a twisted way. It was as if she were lulling him to sleep. But her words carried with them an undeniable certainty. The truck continued moving forward, gliding along an invisible road, the air growing colder with each passing moment. Daniel's breaths came shallow, his chest heavy, as though his body was no longer his own. His body was simply a vessel, a cage for whatever dark force had claimed him. He looked at her again. Her face was still distorted, a nightmare that couldn't be dismissed. Her smile stretched impossibly wide, but her eyes, those dark, bottomless pits, stared into his very soul. There was no escaping the truth now. He had made a choice. He had picked her up, and now he was trapped in her world. The truck's headlights flickered, and suddenly the road seemed to twist, distort, as though it was alive. The night itself had begun to warp, its edges curling like a page of an ancient book. The end was near, and then, in the distance, he saw it, a figure, a shape standing at the edge of the road, outlined by the faintest of lights. It was human, but somehow not. His body screamed to turn away, to drive faster, but he was paralyzed, trapped in the truck. The woman beside him watched with quiet amusement. Daniel's eyes fixed on the figure as the truck drew closer. The figure stepped into the headlights, revealing its face. It was him. The face in the figure's shadow was his own, and the smile that stretched across its lips was the same as hers. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. The figure, his figure, stood motionless in the middle of the road, eyes wide, staring directly at the truck as it hurtled toward him. His instinct screamed at him to swerve, to brake, to do anything, but his hands felt frozen to the wheel. The truck moved as if guided by something far more powerful than him, the engine roaring like a beast ready to pounce. And yet, the figure did not move. It stood there, waiting. Daniel's breaths were ragged, his vision blurring with panic. The closer the truck got, the clearer the face became. It was unmistakable. It was him. But it wasn't. The face was a distorted version of his own, a grotesque reflection warped in a mirror that wasn't quite right. The skin seemed too stretched, the eyes too wide, the smile too wide. The truck continued forward, and Daniel's chest tightened with an overwhelming sense of dread. He slammed his foot down on the brake, but it felt like the pedal had no resistance. It was as if the truck was no longer under his control, as though some invisible force had taken the wheel, driving them to the inevitable end. The figure's smile grew even wider. Suddenly, with a sickening lurch, the truck skidded to a stop inches away from the figure. Daniel's body jerked forward, the seatbelt digging into his chest. He gasped for air, his vision spinning as his hands trembled violently on the steering wheel. Outside, the figure stood still, its hollow gaze now fixed on Daniel. The woman, no longer just a passenger, was silent beside him, her expression unreadable. "This is it." Her voice came soft, but it felt like a thunderclap in the silence of the truck. Daniel didn't respond. His mind was a swirling mess of confusion and terror. How could he have ended up here? How could this nightmare be real? He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Her lips curled into that twisted smile again. "I am your choice." The words seemed to echo in his head, reverberating with the force of a truth too terrible to understand. And then the figure outside moved. It didn't walk. It glided, as if it were part of the air itself. A slow, deliberate motion toward the truck, toward Daniel. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His entire body was frozen in place, helpless. As the figure drew closer, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold. It was no longer just him. Inside the figure's body, he could see hundreds of faces, each one twisted in agony. There was no room for them, no space in his body, just a mass of screaming faces pressing together in an eternal, nightmarish dance of torment. You will join them. The woman's voice rang in his ears, and before Daniel could comprehend it, the figure reached out. His vision went black. Daniel's eyes opened again, but this time he was no longer in the truck. The road had disappeared, the endless highway replaced by an infinite expanse of darkness, a void so deep that it seemed to stretch on forever. There was no sky, no horizon, only a cold, suffocating blackness that pressed him from every side, leaving him in an overwhelming silence. He couldn't move. His body felt like stone, heavy and unresponsive. The woman, she was there, standing beside him, her smile still stretching unnaturally wide, as though it could consume him. Her eyes, those hollow pits, never left him. But the worst part wasn't her gaze or her smile, or even the way she seemed to distort the very air around him. The worst part was the silence, the absolute, crushing absence of sound, of anything familiar. He couldn't feel the truck beneath him, the road beneath the tires. There was no sense of motion. He was trapped in a moment that had no end, no beginning. The woman's voice broke the silence. "There's no way back, Daniel." Her words were a whisper, but they were the loudest thing in the void. They clung to him, suffocated him, pressed against his skull like the weight of 1,000 years of regret. "You're mine now." Daniel wanted to scream, to tear himself away from this place. But the more he tried, the more his body refused to move. He was bound here, frozen in this unending moment, as though the universe itself had pressed pause on his life. He tried to focus, to remember how he had ended up here. He had been driving, no, escaping, hadn't he? But none of it made sense anymore. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt real. The woman stepped closer, and this time she was different. The smile was gone. The expression on her face was one of expectation, like a predator waiting for its prey to finally succumb. "This is the end of the road, Daniel." Her voice was like ice, and her words stung, each syllable carving deeper into his consciousness. The end of the road. There was no way to deny it. He had reached the final destination, and there was no escape from it. In the distance, he saw a movement. A figure. The same figure from before. The one with his face. The one with the screaming faces trapped inside it. It was coming closer, moving across the void with the same unnatural glide. And behind it, there were more. Hundreds of figures. All of them silent, but all of them horrifyingly real. Daniel felt the weight of them, their presence suffocating the air, closing in on him, each face a distorted reflection of his own. He could see their eyes, those hollow, emptied eyes, staring into him, each one a fragment of the endless nightmare. And then he understood they had all been like him. Each one of them had once driven down the same road, made the same mistake, picked up the wrong passenger, and now they were here, trapped forever, lost in the void. "You're one of us now, Daniel." The woman's voice was final. There was no more need for words. She had claimed him, as she had claimed the others before him. Daniel could feel his consciousness slipping away, like sand through his fingers. He was no longer in control of his body, no longer in control of his mind. The faces around him grew closer, and the air grew colder still. And just before everything went completely dark, he heard the whisper that he would never escape. "There's no more road." When Daniel opened his eyes once more, there was no relief. There was no return to reality. He wasn't in the truck. He wasn't even on a road anymore. He wasn't anywhere. The darkness stretched on infinitely, like an ocean with no shore, with no sky. Just an oppressive, empty void. A void that consumed everything. He tried to scream, but there was no sound. No air to carry it. His voice was just an idea, an echo trapped inside his own mind. Nothing would escape. He tried to move, but his body, his very self, felt like it had become part of the void. His limbs were heavy, unresponsive, frozen in time, trapped in a place where there was no up, no down, no sense of direction. She was there again, The woman, the figure who had claimed him. She stood in the distance, her form barely visible in the dark, her hollow eyes staring at him like an eternal punishment. Her smile was wide, unnatural, the only thing visible in the vast, empty darkness. Daniel's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of her presence pressing in on him. The crushing force of her gaze, her infinite, unblinking stare. It was like the very core of the soul was exposed to her, vulnerable, bare. Her voice echoed in the silence, too clear, too close. "You'll never wake up, Daniel." He felt her words sink deep into his bones. A truth, a fact. He had reached a point where there was no return. There would be no escape, no more road. The faces, the other versions of him, were there too, everywhere, surrounding him, closing in. Some were barely distinguishable, lost in the fog of the void. Others were clear, their eyes locked onto him, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Daniel's heart raced in his chest, but his body still wouldn't move. He was locked in place, unable to escape the nightmare that had become his reality. He wanted to run. He wanted to shout. He wanted to break free from this endless, suffocating darkness. But he couldn't. His body wouldn't listen. He was theirs now. "This is your forever, Daniel." The woman's voice filled his mind, a calm, cruel whisper. And as her words sank deeper into his consciousness, he felt the darkness around him grow thicker, more suffocating, until it felt like his very breath was being consumed. The other versions of him reached out with their hands, their ghostly limbs extending toward him, their faces contorted in anguish. Daniel felt the invisible pull of their touch, their agony a constant weight pressing down on him. They were all trapped. They were all his choices, every single one of them, from the moment he picked her up to the moment he was here, with them, in his eternal prison. "You're never going home." The woman's words reverberated through his skull, more powerful than ever before. Her laughter followed, soft and melodic, but unbearably cold. It wrapped itself around his thoughts like a serpent, tightening with each passing second. And just like that, Daniel understood. He understood what it meant to be lost, to be forgotten. He understood what it meant to be one of them, a ghost, a fragment, a forgotten soul trapped in an endless loop, repeating the same mistakes, facing the same horrors forever. In that moment, he realized there was nothing to do, nothing left to fight. He had crossed the threshold. There was no going back. There was no end to this nightmare. And as the void closed in around him, as the darkness took its final form, he knew there was no more road. Daniel's mind felt like it was being pulled in 1,000 directions at once. The darkness around him had no end, no boundaries, no ground beneath his feet. It was as if the very concept of reality had ceased to exist. His body, still paralyzed in place, felt as if it were made of nothingness, just another particle in the vast emptiness that surrounded him. His thoughts were scattered, fragmented. The memories of the road, of the truck, of the woman, were fading fast, like wisps of smoke slipping through his fingers. The faces, the other Daniels, they surrounded him, each one a reflection of a past version of himself, each one trapped in the same eternal loop, the same fate. "You were always meant to be here." The woman's voice was soft, but it carried a weight that crushed him, that sank deep into his very soul. It wasn't just a voice. It was an invitation to give up, to accept this fate, to join the others in the endless, suffocating darkness. His heart pounded, but his body refused to move. He could feel the presence of the other faces closing in, their gazes boring into him, their silent screams echoing in his mind. Every one of them had made the same mistake. Every one of them had chosen wrong. And now, they were all part of this nightmare. "You're all part of me now." The woman stepped closer. Her form grew sharper, more defined in the void. Her smile was wider than ever before, like it was capable of consuming him whole. She was no longer just an observer. She was the beginning and the end. The force that had pulled him in. Daniel wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but all he could do was watch. Watch as she moved closer. Watch as she reached out with her long, slender fingers, slowly, deliberately. "You are mine, Daniel, and you always will be." Her voice was almost a lullaby now, soft and hypnotic, and for a moment, He almost gave in. For a moment, he almost believed that this endless, suffocating darkness was his home now, that this was his fate, an eternal night where nothing ever changed, where nothing ever mattered. But then, a flicker of defiance sparked his chest. He wasn't going to just give up. Not yet. He struggled, trying to force movement into his limbs, trying to pull himself free from the grasp of the void. But each movement felt like wading through thick, invisible mud. It was like his very will was being drained, sucked away by the darkness. But still he fought. He had to fight. You think you can escape? The woman's laugh was soft but chilling, echoing all around him. It sounded like the laughter of someone who had seen it all, who had already won. Daniel's mind raced. There had to be something he could do. And then it came to him. It wasn't about fighting the darkness. It wasn't about trying to escape her grip. It was about facing it, accepting it. He had to embrace the nothingness, the endless night that had consumed him. Only then could he understand the truth. Only then would he finally be free of the fear that gripped him. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs, and for the first time since the nightmare began, he let go. He stopped fighting. He stopped trying to escape. And as he did, the darkness around him seemed to shift. The faces of the other Daniels, the endless versions of himself, blurred and merged until they were no longer separate. They were all part of him now, part of the same fate. The woman stepped closer, and this time her smile faded. You finally understood. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, there was no fear. There was only understanding, only acceptance. And as the darkness closed in, as he felt himself dissolve into the endless night, he knew this was his eternal place now. There was no more road, no more light, only the darkness.